to pretend that they were going to be setting up a socialist country. And they would use the symbolism from communist flags to design their own flag. And of course, this we felt was very anti-American and brought great concern to parents.
And so there has been this discussion in the media. The CSCOPE people,
Yes.
I believe, have promised to look at that. In fact, they had a hearing yesterday where they mentioned that they will be looking at the social studies curriculum first.
Yes.
As they go back through things and so on. But then why are we still discussing CSCOPE today after all this exposure and all of this retraction?
Well, Senator Patrick issued a letter giving some very specific guidelines that would take place. And one of the things in the letter was that in every local school district, and we're hoping that parents and teachers are aware of this, that teachers are now supposed to be informed that they may opt to use textbooks and other materials as opposed to using CSCOPE, for example. And so we're hoping that teachers have been informed of this and that parents are being made aware that they may see textbooks coming home again in backpacks. We're excited about that. This was a big plus for teachers, and this week's been exciting because we've seen lots of textbooks that previously had been sitting in closets in schools, brand new textbooks full of wonderful resources, and they're now being checked out, and students are bringing them home.
Now help me, because I'm a native of Illinois, but these are still Texas textbooks that have gone through a very careful adoption process for correctness, for civility and things of this nature. Is that still correct about these textbooks? Now, has CSCOPE gone through the same kind of scrutiny?
Well, we're very fortunate to live in Texas because our State Board of Education conducts very rigorous screenings of all textbooks that are hoping to make it onto what is called an approved list of textbooks. CSCOPE was able to come into the schools for a variety of different ways, but one of the ways was that they're claiming that it's a supplemental material. However, it's being implemented on such a large scale across the state of Texas, and of course, teachers being told to use the lessons and such, that would not be typical of a supplemental material. But nonetheless, Senator Patrick is calling for a review, starting with social studies, starting with the social studies lessons, because we found such grievous problems with particularly in world history.
Now, it's my understanding that Senator Patrick's committee hearing, the hearing that they conducted, has brought to light the fact that a lot of the CSCOPE components, the lessons in particular, were held secret from parents. Yes. So the parents could not see these indoctrination issues or see the weakness that I saw in the algebra program. That by state law, parents are to have access to curriculum materials. And so Senator Patrick's hearing and his letter has indicated that CSCOPE is now agreeing to obey the law in Texas for public disclosure of their material, for public meetings rather than secret meetings that they had held up until now. So we have had at least those kinds of improvements. I remember as a teacher at the beginning of the school year, I was given a document of maybe 3 or 4 pages. So it was read to me by my superintendent, and I was to sign it, and that was discuss the lessons. I could not share the lessons with parents. I did anyway because I was so concerned. Did you also sign a gag order of that nature?
Well, every teacher across the state of Texas had to agree to this non-disclosure contract that was legally binding and threatened to take legal recourse against any teacher that would share lessons. And I hope that parents, I hope that mothers and fathers that are out there listening this evening, I hope that they think about how important it is to exercise the right that they are given by the state to peruse all instructional materials, and according to our state code, you have the right to see all tests after they are taken and then brought home, so that a parent can stay connected with what their child is learning at school. So this sent up a red flag for parents when they were not being allowed to access a website where they could see the lessons. And I think that this is a real wake-up call for a lot of parents to be really invested in the lessons that are taking place at school every day.
Has this gag order been now rescinded? Are there any penalties now if teachers share lessons with parents and so forth?
Well, according to Senator Patrick's according to Senator Patrick's letter, the parents now should have full access to the lessons. However, that has not taken place yet, and we're waiting eagerly for parents to be able to see the CSCOPE lessons if they choose. But apparently that just hasn't been set up yet for parents to access. There's a parent portal on the CSCOPE website. The problem is that the parent portal in the past has shown parents a very sketchy overview that was available to them through the Texas Education Agency anyway. So it really did not allow them to see samples of lessons. And so they're amending that right now and trying to let parents have access. But you can now go to your classroom teacher and say, I want to see the lessons that my child will be partaking of this school year in various subjects, in all the subjects.
And at the meeting of TESCCC, which is the consortium of education service centers they put together CSCOPE. They had a meeting yesterday that I attended and testified at, and now that you're saying that, I recall that parents can also go to a school district office and view the lessons. They won't be able to view the exams, of course, which would, not be fair. But they can view the lessons and the answer keys and so on like this for any of the classes that their students are taking. And I would strongly urge that this happens. If there are parents watching here that have had concerns in the past or have concerns now about CSCOPE, and you should, okay? My wife and I raised 5 kids. We've got 8 grandchildren. We are very concerned. We are very involved with their education. If this had happened to our children, we would have, been running away from it all as fast as we could. With this new liberty that parents now have to access the lessons, I would strongly urge that they take the time to go to school district offices and have a good long look at the CSCOPE material. So, as a result of Senator Patrick's meeting and his letter and the meeting that we had yesterday that confirmed the important passages of Senator Patrick's letter, the question should arise, are these changes sufficient? And in my recollection, of course, of teaching Algebra 1, CSCOPE Algebra 1 at Luling High School, the answer is heavens no, because the curriculum material was so very bad and there was such a terrible disconnection between the lessons and the exams that the students were taking. And if you can imagine this, if you're a teacher, even if you're not a teacher, if you can imagine, anybody watching this that can remember any of the exams that they took in school, remember how you worked, for a week or 2 or 3 before the exam, and then you took an exam and what you saw in the exam was familiar to you. Not the case with CSCOPE, which is just absolutely insane. It would be as if your football team practices and then they run out on the field and it's a soccer contest. You haven't been practicing the soccer rules and so on, and you're supposed to play a well-practiced soccer team in soccer when you've been practicing football. That's my perception of this, and this has not changed, and neither have the week lessons. I give you a chance to add to that as you wish.
Well, my background is actually in curriculum and instruction, and I have a master's degree in curriculum, and it has been a particular passion of mine, and so I've been watching this issue very closely with deep concern. There are certainly a lot of weak lessons in CSCOPE, and some of the lessons, I actually testified about one of them that sort of makes me laugh, but it's not funny. It had the students making a sedimentary rock out of ramen noodles. Now, in 4th grade, I like to see lessons that are rich and deep in content where students, for example, are learning about sedimentary and igneous and metamorphic rocks. And we live in Texas where there are sedimentary rocks everywhere. So if a student wants to learn about sedimentary rocks, why not bring some real sedimentary rocks into the classroom? And, get some magnifying lenses and look at the fossil formation and that kind of thing. But why in the world would anyone have a silly lesson about ramen noodles and the student is supposed... And then the funny thing is that they took it a step further, and they didn't just have the student making a sedimentary rock out of ramen noodles, but testing it with vinegar on ramen noodles when you could put vinegar onto a real piece of limestone and watch the chemical reaction take place. And so this is a really good example of, there's a lot of talk in the media about, are we dumbing down instruction in the schools today? And are we really preparing our students with rigor? CSCOPE throws around the word rigor a lot, but the lessons actually lack rigor. And it's very frightening for me personally, because Texas used to have a wonderful spiral curriculum. At each level of the way, a student has to learn particular things so that when they get to the next grade level, they stand upon those bricks as they grow and as they learn. And that is something that you have to respect very much, and you can't rip apart the spiral intention that a curriculum has to have. When I actually look at CSCOPE, I think it's misnamed as a curriculum because the lessons are full of holes, they have academic gaps, and in fact, we now have a first generation of students that have gone through elementary school using nothing but CSCOPE, and we call these our gappy students. CSCOPE does not contain a spelling component, it doesn't contain a grammar component. We're faced with students who cannot compose and write a cohesive sentence. Their writing is lacking, and I think many people that are watching this evening know that writing scores in schools in Texas have fallen drastically. Some of us teachers feel strongly that CSCOPE may be a causal factor in some of the weaknesses that we're seeing in students. And I want to emphasize one other area. CSCOPE doesn't have any content, and this leaves parents and children very vulnerable. Let me give you an example. Typically, in a class, say you're teaching history, you would open up to a chapter in the textbook, and there you would find the content. The content would be 10, 12 pages about the Civil War. CSCOPE is a script for the teacher to follow, but it doesn't have any content for the children to read and follow along with. So therefore, teachers are left to download content from all over the place, anywhere on the internet that they can find something about, say, the Civil War. Well, what that does, the material that they're presenting is not grade-leveled reading. It's not controlled. It hasn't been reviewed by anyone for accuracy. And so parents are really, really in a vulnerable place with CSCOPE because teachers are pooling things from all over to complete, essentially to provide content for the students. And typically, that's the beauty of a really good textbook, is it's already been done for us by publishers, it's already been reviewed, the content is written by experts, it's been checked for errors, all done before it comes to us. But CSCOPE puts a burden on teachers because they have to actually provide the content. And that leaves parents very vulnerable. Where the material is coming from, what it contains, what the slant or the bias might be, that has not been reviewed or controlled in any way.
You're mentioning the absence of content reminds me of some important gaps in the Algebra 1 program that we were required to use in Luling. Early on, I had noticed important gaps, not only in the curriculum, but in the students' background knowledge. So I would ask my principal for permission to supplement, and I was given mixed messages, but most of them were, no, we want to see how CSCOPE works all by itself. Mm-hmm. And I thought that that was a very interesting answer, to say the least, because it seemed like the purpose of my teaching was to test out CSCOPE rather than help students learn algebra. And I found that to be rather unsettling. Now, the content that's missing in the algebra is most significantly at the beginning. Most algebra courses begin with 2 chapters of introductory terminology, use of variables, how to translate English phrases into algebra sentences, and so forth. And these are missing in CSCOPE. It's very disturbing. And it's obvious in the classroom that this is handicapping the students because we don't have these vocabulary handles on the ideas that we are discussing. I've often thought that that's very much like having a set of pots and pans that have no handles on them. It's just very difficult to use. Before we leave the issue, though, of testing, I think it's important to know, you've done graduate work, so have I, and my graduate degree is also in curriculum and instruction. And that comes from an era when we discussed testing concepts such as validity and reliability. Now, validity means a test is supposed to be testing what the students are supposed to have learned. CSCOPE does not have valid exams in that regard. Reliability means that a test will yield the same scores if an equally well-prepared student takes the same exam. They should have comparable scores. Because of the setup of these exams, the bad questions, the fact that there are some free response questions as well as some multiple choice questions, it is very difficult to see what the students are learning, first of all, but it also brings into serious question that there is any reliability whatsoever in the CSCOPE exams. Now, the gulf between these exams and the lessons that the students are learning should be extremely disturbing. This gives the students, of course, very little chance to do well on the exam, so it's very discouraging, very depressing for the students. The leaders that we have heard from at the various hearings and so on that we have attended have explained this by saying, well, one group of people wrote the lessons and another group of people wrote the exams. Well, that's an explanation, but that's no excuse whatsoever for this big gulf that is defeating the students and making the whole experience, almost, again, like you said, a comedy, except it's a very, very dark comedy. There have been times when I was grading the exams and, student after student would be missing the same question because it had nothing to do with what we studied. And I felt like I should be wearing a clown nose to be going through this kind of exercise. It's like I was being made to be Larry or Curly or Moe because of this aspect of CSCOPE. I do want to add something here. At Luling, there is some special circumstances where the leadership, I should say the circumstances led the leadership to saying CSCOPE, only CSCOPE, nothing but the CSCOPE. That's not the case with a lot of districts. We have heard from teachers and principals in other school districts where CSCOPE is simply used as a supplement. And if you ask a lot of the service center people who helped create CSCOPE and helped do workshops on CSCOPE, they will tell you that that was the purpose of CSCOPE originally. It was not there to be the curriculum. It was there to supplement the curriculum with important ideas that might appear on the STAR test and other things that would help a new teacher get settled, give them some choices and so on to be sensitive to their students. It was never intended to be the kind of curriculum that it was presented and used in Luling and in other school districts. So
I'd really like to add a comment about the lack of integrity about the testing. Most specifically, many schools are conducting what is called data-driven instruction. And what that means is that after we give a test and we get all of this information about which students did well and what questions they missed, and then we go back to do to revise our instruction based on what the students need. Well, that would all be fine and dandy if the tests were valid and could provide that kind of data. We really feel like we had a small victory when Senator Patrick told teachers that they could use other materials along with CSCOPE or instead of CSCOPE, like textbooks, for example. But it would be a sweeter victory if schools would stop conducting data-driven instruction based on the CSCOPE common assessments, because they're simply poorly designed. They do not in any way evaluate in any legitimate manner the instruction that's taken place prior. They're discouraging for the students. The questions are often developmentally inappropriate for the students. And so basically, they're wasting class time. And time is precious in the elementary school. Well, it's precious at every level, but every moment counts. I want parents to truly understand that the current statistic that we have is that Texas students are spending 1 out of every 5 instructional days in the classroom are now spent testing. That could be called benchmarking, it can be called common assessments, it can be called testing. That is a lot of time. That adds up to approximately 2 months out of our precious school year. The students are spent testing. How much farther could they be if they were learning, being exposed to new instructional material during that time? Not to mention developmentally how inappropriate it is for very young children to be put in a stressful situation like that. Now, I know a lot of parents have complained and have had questions about teachers that are using the scores from the common assessments in CSCOPE toward the child's grade, toward their academic grade. That's a travesty. The assessments they're just invalid. And the child doesn't have any material to study for the test. The instruction doesn't match the test. And to put that toward a student's academic record, it's just unfair. And so I know a lot of parents have raised serious concerns about that.
Which brings to mind that one of the other changes that has been brought about because of Dan Patrick's hearing and his letter and the discussion yesterday at the CSCCA meeting is that the students are now being issued textbooks. At least that this is what is supposed to happen. We heard this at the CSCCA meeting yesterday, that students who are not previously issued textbooks, such as in Luling, they are now to have textbooks. If there are parents viewing this whose students have not had textbooks up to this point, they should be asking their children, do you now have textbooks? And if the answer is no, you need to get on the phone to the school district and say, what's the story on this? Because these state-approved textbooks that are supposed to be supplemented by CSCOPE are to be there. These textbooks, some people might look at textbooks and say, well, they're old-fashioned and the new thing is online stuff. Well, there's not a whole lot of way to improve a good algebra book by having it online versus having it in a textbook format. There are advantages to textbooks. I recall in my own algebra experience back in 1960 and 61, there were times when I had sufficient confusion with algebra ideas that I made notes about some critical issues in the back of the textbook that were not presented with any clarity in the actual textbook. And these notes in the back, inside the back cover of my textbook, were what helped me survive in Algebra 1 back in 1960 and 61 when online learning was just, way down the road. But a textbook has a table of contents, it has an index, it has a glossary. CSCOPE doesn't have any of this. Apparently they never even thought of this kind of thing. There are times when I have taught a course, my geometry course that I taught back in Archer City was almost entirely worksheets. We had some activities and so on. But from time to time I would provide the students a list of the theorems that we had had so far, the vocabulary that we had had so far, and every month or so I gave them an updated list of these things. CSCOPE should have this kind of thing in algebra, and they do not.
I'd love to interject with a story here. A friend of mine just told me this 2 days ago. Previous to Senator Patrick's letter suggesting that that textbooks be, well, suggesting that that teachers have the option of not using CSCOPE, this particular mom told a story that her daughter would come home with CSCOPE lessons to do for homework, and it would be a 2-hour session of trying to find the answers on the internet somewhere, or crying, couldn't find the answers, calling people to see if perhaps they knew. Well, this particular student came home with a textbook in their backpack, and the same kind of homework assignment took 15 minutes. And the child was able to do it independently by using the textbook as a resource. And the mother just breathed a gigantic sigh of relief. What a learning experience that is for the child to go to the source, find the information, then have to summarize it onto their homework instead of it being a frustrating situation. Very young children simply need something to reference when they're learning. So I'm a big advocate of very well designed textbooks that have gone under scrutiny and review.
I'm reminded here of our hearing yesterday with TESCCCA in this regard. TESCCCA showed commitment toward reviewing CSCOPE lessons. They said at the beginning, social studies. That's where a lot of scrutiny has been, the indoctrination efforts with regard to faith, with regard to U.S. history. That's gotten them a lot of negative press, a lot of negative attention, which, well, it should. First on their agenda, they said, was going to be reviewing the social studies curriculum. I understood that, okay? As a math teacher, I was listening for when will they be working with the math lessons, okay? Well, the second thing they said this coming summer we'll look at social studies, and somewhere in there they said later on in the summer we would look at English language arts. One other time they brought up science, okay? And there I am waiting, all right? Math, math. Are we going to be doing math anytime? There was never any mention of math. That makes my skin crawl. Okay, math is the one. I've got this statement here. Comanche ISD Superintendent Marshall Harrison, who I quoted yesterday. I've not had his permission, but I think I can do this. He said, CSCOPE is very productive for social studies and science. There are holes in the curriculum with regard to math. And I read that, and there was no response. Okay, come on, guys. Math has a lot to do. In fact, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says that mathematics has more to do with a person's lifetime income than any of the other subjects. Now, you might say, well, isn't language important? Well, yes, it is, but most people achieve enough in language. Language is expected. Math is something that people say, well, I wasn't good in math, so my kids aren't going to be good anyway. And they kind of give up on it, and math achievement as a result suffers. And so it becomes a rarer commodity and a more valuable commodity.
Yes.
For a person's lifetime income, for their opportunities to do what they want to in life. And so it is extremely important. And why this is happening in districts like Luling, especially with a great number of disadvantaged students who really need that math to be able to become advantaged students, is very disturbing to me.
Well, I think that one thing we have in common is we both share such a passion for the fact that our students don't have time to wait. They need math, they need accurate science, and they need to be able to advance themselves academically right now with quality materials. So I know a particular interest of mine this evening is, in the hopes that there are mothers and fathers watching, is to dialogue about what a parent can do to be invested in their local school district, and how they can follow up with concerns about CSCOPE as a curriculum. We know that school budgets are coming up for adoption right now. So we're going to be looking at schools that are opting now not to purchase CSCOPE for next year, and perhaps to use their valuable instructional material funds perhaps on other materials, or Yeah, I'd love to see our Texas students taking wonderful field trips that we can't afford right now. Everybody who's watching knows that school budgets have been cut. We've seen teachers laid off, and yet school districts across the state of Texas are spending millions of dollars each year. And I need to emphasize, your local school is leasing the right to use CSCOPE every year. That means that if they pay one time, they do not own CSCOPE. They merely lease it. And our experience in the past has been every September when teachers arrive back at school, the lessons are not written yet. They're not posted. And so we're purchasing something sight unseen where the lessons are being written as they go. And this has been the experience that we've had with CSCOPE in the past. CSCOPE has been in our Texas schools for 7 years now. And I suggest that we do not have time for our students to wait while CSCOPE gets perfected. Or in the past, we've always had access to curriculum materials that we've had viable results on. We've been sold materials that have statistics and research behind them to show that they've worked in the past. They've been piloted with students. CSCOPE was never piloted before it was purchased. And so we know that we're getting hundreds, thousands every day concerned emails and phone calls from parents across the state saying, right now, what can we do in our local area? And that's the place that we can make a difference. Every single day when you're driving to work, you drive right past your local school building that you pay property taxes to support. And so the school board that you have elected in your school, in your local school board, they have to listen to you, to your concerns. And so we're asking parents to, for example, do you know who your local school board members are? Do you know them? And most importantly, do they know you? Do they know that you have children in the schools that you're concerned about? Make a list of your questions and begin to investigate right at the local school level. How is your school handling this? What materials will they be purchasing for next year? A really important note is that if a school district spends less than $25,000 to lease CSCOPE, the superintendent does not have to get approval. However, a superintendent may need to listen to concerns that parents have. Many school districts across the state are paying way more than $25,000 a year to lease CSCOPE. Where is that going to appear in your school budget? Is it going to say CSCOPE on a line item? It probably will not. It will probably be hidden in the budget under the purchase of instructional materials or curriculum materials or supplemental materials. CSCOPE is what is called a curriculum management system. The purpose of CSCOPE is to make sure that all of the teachers are teaching the exact same lesson on the exact same day, at the exact same time. And the reason is because states and the nation is looking at the possibility of evaluating teachers based on state testing. If that day ever comes, schools have to find a way to control all of the variables in the educational environment. But I'm going to pose a question to you parents who are listening. How many of you think that when your child gets on the yellow school bus and goes to school every day, how many of you think that it's really wonderful that they're going to get Mrs. So-and-so because she's such a creative teacher, or she's been such a passionate teacher about science in the past? Well, the purpose of CSCOPE is to make teachers all teach the very same way. And so it makes teachers very robotic, using a script, and it turns schools into a sort of like as an assembly line, a sort of like a factory, where there's supposed to be a prescription. Before your child ever arrives at school, someone has already determined what kind of lesson is going to be played out. Now, those of you who are listening who have experience teaching, you know that when you have a class, each class is just a little bit different. When you have really bright students and you have the opportunity to be creative in your lessons, you can take those students and just soar. And of course, if you have students that need to have a little more repetition, you might do a little bit more reteach, but you pace your class. And so someone can't outline and give you a script every single day of what you're going to do. Otherwise, what this costs the schools across Texas is a really, really bright teachers, you know, our teachers that are super creative are brought down to a mediocre place so that everyone can be the same. And that is one of the reasons why teachers have such strong opposition to being forced to use CSCOPE lessons. And I hope that we never see the day return across Texas where prescriptive learning like that is a part of the coercion that's being imposed upon teachers. When we pay teachers to teach, we should get our money's worth. And if a teacher is really creative and can do dynamite things in the classroom, we ought to be taking advantage of all of the experience and expertise that that teacher has to offer.
Which brings to mind a question. And I know the answer to this from my teaching experience here in Texas, of course. But when a publisher presents a textbook series to you and your colleagues, are there options for helping gifted students and special education students as part of those state-adopted textbook programs?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of state-adopted textbooks, is because when you go to teach a lesson, say on the water cycle or something, you can just reach at your fingertips. There are addendum materials that go with the series, where if you have a class of really gifted students, you can just reach for materials that are designed to take those students further with their learning. And so textbooks make that process of planning a lesson so much easier because you have the resources at your fingertips. And I want to stress, CSCOPE does not have any materials that even proclaim to reach the gifted child. It does not have any materials that reach the ESL learner. It does not have, well, there's lots of different materials that come with textbooks, and I won't go on and on about that. But CSCOPE doesn't have any vocabulary component, for example, which is something I'm a big fan of, is building vocabulary, especially in the early learner.
Yes. Why is it? We've had these comments about superintendents and school boards. Why is it? I've heard this question from just about everybody that I've raised the CSCOPE issues with. Why is it, with all of its weaknesses and missing things for special ed and gifted students and the terrible disconnect between the exams and the lessons, why is it that superintendents and school boards have invested money in this? It turns out that recently we have gotten some clues about this sort of thing. I would give you the first chance if you want to answer that. If not, I'll roll with what I have read recently.
Well, I'm going to defer this one to you because I know you've been doing a lot of research, and certainly a lot of people are following the money trail and all that. For me personally, though, I will say that I have not met very many school leaders that have taken the time to actually read the lessons, and I think that's very, very shocking for parents. And so to think that something could be purchased where people really haven't read through the lessons.
Right.
And it's just sad. It's really
That's
sad.
right. And actually I have not done much research on this. A lot of other people who have raised concerns about CSCOPE have also done this. I believe the year is 2006 when some funding was cut from the regional service centers, and the idea then was born, perhaps before that, but the idea was born that if they could market all of the helpful materials that they send to teachers rather than just giving it away, then they would have some income that would compensate for the funding cut. So out of that then came some of the impetus for CSCOPE. But it happens that CSCOPE then has a selling advantage, that the school districts are called to the service centers, the superintendents, the principals are called to these regional service centers and told about CSCOPE. We had a letter sent to us by again, another concerned CSCOPE citizen, from a superintendent to the parents in the school district that said, oh, there's this scary STAR test coming, okay? And, oh, it's higher level and so on, which,
yes,
by the way, is, for what I've seen, is just nonsense, okay? But it's so scary, and the only hope is CSCOPE. which is probably an idea that was promoted by these cash-starved service
Yes.
centers. And so the superintendent then is kind of scared and relays this fear to the school board, and they don't know much either, and so it's pretty easy for them to fall into this idea, like this one superintendent said, it's the only hope, it's the only way. Now, of course, I strongly disagree with that. In the past, I have taken a solid textbook. When I taught algebra, it was the Saxon series. When it was geometry, it was my own stuff, Saxon style. And as we got to within a month or 6 weeks of the testing time in the era of the tax tests, we would continue, of course, with the core curriculum, but we would be sprinkling in with lessons and quizzes and exams, special attention to objectives that we had not yet covered or we would not be expected to cover. For instance, algebra objectives during a geometry class. And we would give special preparation time, and the students who did the work did very, very well.
Yes.
And so not only did they do well on their tests, and this CSCOPE is not the only hope, but what we provided that CSCOPE doesn't was a solid course in geometry, a solid course in algebra. CSCOPE doesn't do that. It's just your probably the epitome of preparing students for a test and giving them nothing more, and not doing a very good job of that kind of test preparation.
Well, I'm really glad that you brought up the way that many superintendents and principals use the STAR test as if it's like the big boogeyman, and they feel, well, I shouldn't say they feel, but many parents probably tremble and hope that their child does well on the state testing. Wouldn't we all want that? It's very important for parents to understand that no matter how frightening the STAR exam sounds, it is actually a test of minimum competency. It is a criterion reference test, and what it does is it measures the very least that a child needs to know to pass from 5th grade to 6th grade. When you keep the test in perspective, the child is actually performing to show the school, does he or she know the very least that they need to know to go on to the next grade level. Now, any teacher would teach way beyond a minimum competency test. Any teacher would not teach the TEKS because they're the smallest brick in a big wall. We teach subjects, we teach content, and we teach it well at a high level so that any student who learns all of this information up here should be able to do the sub-skills down below called the TEKS and should easily be able to pass on to the next grade level. The problem is that if you bring something in like CSCOPE that overemphasizes the teaching of the TEKS and aiming for this minimum competency, you're actually bringing everybody down to that level instead of teaching at a high level, and then that would be the minimum that the child would perform. An interesting fact is that we have a friend who's been doing some analysis of school districts that have opted not to purchase CSCOPE. And we now have scores from the previous STAR test last year, which have just been posted from school districts across Texas. And we're finding what we pretty much knew all along is that schools that have opted not to purchase CSCOPE are actually ahead of the game. And they've been scoring higher on the STAR test. And so also we have some high-performing school districts that never purchased CSCOPE in the first place, or purchased it and it was just put aside on the shelf, and teachers were given full reign to make instructional decisions that they best saw fit. One of the things that we do know is we know what makes high-performing schools, we know what makes them offer an excellent instructional environment, and that's what we all want. One of the key factors in an excellent instructional environment is that the teachers have a great deal of input into designing the instructional decisions that are made on behalf of the children. When you encounter a situation where teachers have very little say about how they go about reaching instructional goals, that is when parents and children are put into a vulnerable position. The places where teachers were forced to use CSCOPE children were left without grammar books, without spelling books, without geography, without vocabulary components. Those children will never be able to make up the gaps in their academic legacy. It will be very, very hard to remediate and catch up what should have been taught gradually and over a period of time. So I strongly encourage parents, I hope we can spend the last few moments that we have together to really emphasize to parents, you are the primary teacher in your child's life. And when your child is coming home from school, and I like to say you get that mommy feeling or that daddy feeling inside, my child's not spelling very well. He or she should be doing multiplication by now. Why doesn't he have a textbook for this? Why is homework so difficult? You should listen to the feelings that you have as a parent and investigate, ask the questions about specifically, where are the instructional materials to support this? My child should have learned multiplication facts by rote memorization in 3rd grade, and my child's already in 4th grade and doesn't know them yet. And so these are key points. Parents to get involved in the local school district, to ask questions of their school board, specifically about curriculum and about the instructional design, who makes decisions. Parents in the past have always been invited into schools where textbooks that are up for adoption, that have not even been purchased yet, have been put on a table in the library. There are teacher committees that get to preview materials before they're purchased. Go back to your district and ask, when do I get to give input about how we're spending our instructional dollars for next year? I'd like to see the materials that are up for us to purchase. And give your input, because we'd love to hear it. Some of the other things that parents can do is to get to know their school board members and to bring concerns to the local school board. I'd like to talk a few minutes about the propaganda and some of the lines that are handed to parents. I think that stifle this kind of questioning and open dialogue. Whenever you're told in a condescending manner that someone else is going to take care of this for you, that they're going to get your child ready for the STAR test, and don't you worry about what's going on when the yellow school bus pulls away, you should worry. Some of the propaganda lines are, we're preparing your child to be a 21st century learner. There's an overemphasis in many schools on technology. If we acquire technology, that will solve all of our problems. Children will go online, which is again putting them in a very vulnerable place. One of the things that CSCOPE does is have children use going online, going to links and reading about things online. Well, the material hasn't been approved or previewed or scanned by any parents. When students are left to go do research and read up on things online, I mean, a person can be put in a vulnerable position. So an overemphasis on technology is going to solve all of our problems. And that should send up a red flag. How is a parent going to oversee what their child is learning when everything is being done online? And by the way, let me clarify, since I've seen some things in the media that have been falsely reported, CSCOPE is not an online education program. CSCOPE is an online resource for teachers. They download lessons from CSCOPE. But, you know, there is online education where students log on to a computer where there's a teacher talking and that child has full access to textbooks and a teacher. That's online education. And CSCOPE is an online resource used primarily by teachers for to garner instructional materials. And I think that's a real important distinction, because those of us that are poised, we do like to see us moving respectfully into technology, into the use of technology in the schools. So we're not in any way downplaying the role that online education may have in the future. And I hope it's done with great integrity. But I know right now that online students are using viable textbooks, so I'm feeling more comfortable about that.
You've brought up what else can parents do. Steve Toth is a state representative who has proposed legislation that would require, I believe, that CSCOPE have the same reviewing that textbooks do, other things pertaining to CSCOPE. Hard legislation. Lots of his fellow representatives have signed on to this. Please encourage this effort.
Yes.
Contact your representatives. Mention Steve Toth's CSCOPE bill in particular, and ask that this be supported so that CSCOPE has to have the same kind of scrutiny that textbooks have for accuracy and completeness and so forth and so on. Mary?
May I interject?
Sure.
I just want to emphasize how approachable Representative Toth has been regarding issues of education. He's very, very concerned, very approachable. And in fact, I'm going to be meeting with him later on this week myself, and I'm looking very much forward to it. So I encourage a lot of parents to call and register their concerns.
And you had also mentioned the gaps in spelling and so forth and so on. I had concern, of course, with the disadvantaged students in Luling not getting a complete algebra program. What can parents do about that? Well, the parents of a lot of these disadvantaged students can't really help with algebra, and I proposed yesterday to the TESCCC group that they fund out of their profits and other resources, they fund summer school Algebra 1 for the Luling students and all other students in the school district who have had this full of holes algebra program instead of the kind of algebra program that they need as a springboard for life and academic work beyond high school. That's another thing. You know, if you are a parent in Luling or some other school district whose child has been cheated out of the opportunity to make their own way in life, stand on their own feet, not depend on the government and so on, take some action. Demand that somebody be held accountable for this nonsense, because this stuff was sold to school districts as being a complete curriculum, which especially in mathematics it is not. It's easy to demonstrate that. On behalf of those students for other civil rights issues, I and I'm sure a lot of other teachers would be very happy to testify and hold people's feet to the fire and get this situation corrected, and get it corrected this coming summer. And I also, in a letter that I drafted to my own Luling newspaper today, I also said this with respect to school boards. I said, make sure that the school board looks at curriculum before they buy it, especially if that material has not had the scrutiny the textbooks have had. And the second thing is that school boards should solicit teacher expertise as part of their examination. And the third thing is that the school board should refuse to buy anything that that people have not had access to. And they cannot buy this propaganda that CSCOPE has been offering, that, oh, we've got all these great new lessons that we need to protect because they're so wonderful, and we're afraid that these other publishers will steal them. It's nonsense, okay? There's nothing whatsoever in this CSCOPE Algebra 1 program that is worth stealing.
Well, you raise a very good point. Many of the CSCOPE lessons, unfortunately, were full of fluff and cut and paste activities. There was a great deal of emphasis on the student doing discovery learning. And I brought something with me today that I hope will be a good closing note. CSCOPE has a very weak philosophy. It's built upon some fallacy, I think, in terms of students just discovering everything for themselves, getting together in discussion groups, and wasting a lot of class time basically sharing information that they should be learning in the first place. I don't know the information to share. But I brought something here. This was based on research that was done for 30 years between 1950 and 1980, comparing pure discovery learning with guided forms of instruction, which I'm a very big fan of direct instruction. And I want to read you something. This will be a good note to leave on. Research has provided overwhelming evidence that for everyone but experts, partial guidance during instruction is significantly less effective than full guidance. Teachers are out there wanting to teach their subject, having so much passion for their subject, and wanting to be the primary conveyor of information for children so that they learn it correctly. It says evidence from well-designed, properly controlled experimental studies supports direct instruction, and researchers have noted that when students learn science in classrooms with pure discovery methods, they often become lost and frustrated, and their confusion can lead to misconception. this is where we're at right now. And we're hoping that we can be a part of a movement to return to more traditional forms of instruction so that our students will be soaring, particularly in the areas of math and science. I'm right with you on that. We're on this exact same page because the future of our country depends on strong math and science instruction in our classrooms. And certainly Texas deserves high quality instruction. Certainly our students deserve the very, very best.
Everything I've seen in math education research confirms that whenever discovery, talk it over strategies were compared with direct instruction invariably came out on top.
Yes, absolutely.
Not only in terms of the student achievement, but the amount of time that was spent doing that. So we need, direct instruction and a good book are hard to beat for communication of information. So I think we're finished.
We are. It's been a very fabulous hour, and I hope people learned a lot.
We'd like to hear from you, and so would your school boards, and so would Steve Toth. And this has been This has been On Point Broadcasting, Special Edition, C-SCOPE, Mary Bowen, Stan Hartzler.
Have a good evening.